Hello, all. My name is Mike Krupica. I am one of the co-founders of Parkdale Roadrunners, one of the current captains of Parkdale Roadrunners, and I am here today with my good friend, Mr. Charlie Dark, from calling in from. Where are you calling in from, Mr. Charlie Dark?
I'm calling in from London town, my friends.
Ah, the accent. I appreciate it. Tell us a little bit more about yourself for the people in Toronto who may not have had the pleasure to engage with you as of yet.
Okay, so for those who are unaware of who I am, my name is Charlie Dark, DJ, poet, writer, creative consultant, community builder, and founder of the infamous Run Dem Crew, and soon to be Run Dem Radio.
I need the air horn. All right. That is quite the impressive resume. Amazing. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for having this conversation. I know when Alan and the CRS crew reached out a while ago about having us do something together, it was more an in-person thing to celebrate the 5 years since our Bridge the Gap at the Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Marathon. And unfortunately, with the state of the state this year, we are now talking about the state of run crews, past, present, and future. And what I know is last time we were able to do this in Toronto as an official BTG event, there was, I believe it was over 300 runners from 31 crews in 21 countries that showed up. And I think that really shows the power of the crew movement when you put, I've often heard you say this, when you put the bat signal out, people show up. And I think being able to engage with runners from across the globe, ideas share, learn, it really helps the culture and the community grow. But before we even go down that path, I would love it if you wouldn't mind giving a piece of the history of crew culture and how we even got to this conversation today.
Okay, so for those who are unaware of where this urban run crew movement started, began in New York, within the mind of the infamous Mike Says of the Bridge Runners, who, as he tells me, was late to pick up his son, Indy, from school one day and ended up not being able to hail a cab. So ended up running to his son's school across one of the bridges. I think it was the Brooklyn Bridge. Don't quote me on that. Ask Mike. And I think he kind of had an epiphany somewhere over the bridge and thought, why don't I share this with my homies, people I know from fashion and music and DJing and graph and all of those kind of things. And that's how Bridge Runners was born. Run Dem Crew came about around 2007, and we were unaware that the Bridge Runners actually existed. And when we did, we kind of reached out to them. And then we started finding out that there were other crews. There was a crew in Paris, Paris Run Club, Embro in Denmark, Berlin Braves, or who were originally called Gravy Team, Pata Running Team. So we were just kind of around 5 or 6 crews all kind of sprung up around the same period of time. We set the big bat signal out. We're going to go to Berlin. I think it was 2012 we went to do a Bridge the Gap with this idea of bringing all these different crews from all these different countries together. And the rest is history. Here we are, 2020, not being able to run together at all.
True say. Yes. Yeah, and so going back to the BTG in 2015, I think at Parkdale, we had a very similar start of a couple friends, myself and Stephen Ardemil, really looking to do something, to create something for our friends and escape the bars, to tell you the truth. And I remember about a year, no, maybe it was 2010, a few months after we'd started, wasn't as far as a year, Stephen got onto Instagram and he looked at me, he's like, there's dudes in New York running across bridges. What are you talking about? And then we stumbled across this community of runners around the world once we fell down the Instagram rabbit hole. And I think that starts to show how technology has served the run crew culture, as well as, it's been, like with all technology, it's a help and a hindrance. But I think it helped create the myth around a lot of figures and people within it, but it also created the desire to travel and meet these people in person. Or when you do show up to races together, you can start putting faces and Instagram handles together, and then the community automatically grows. So I think
Yeah.
that really led us into that BTG in Toronto, where so few runners had come and run the marathon in Toronto, seen what our city was like in October, as well as really understand what the climate, what the vibe, and what crew culture was all about, because that was still in its early stages. It was still in its infancy, exactly. And what I love about that and is when BTGs were happening, and I still see this, is like the host crew isn't necessarily the crew that's running the race. They're the ones that are putting on the activations. They're running the cheer stations. They're doing all of the stuff so that the people that show up in the city don't have to think about anything. Quite often, you don't even need to think about where you're staying. Like, we got you covered type of thing. Food, all of that. Like, see it from a local's perspective.
Yeah.
And in doing that, I think what people have been able to see, and how people from outside of the culture have been able to get into the culture, is by seeing their cities represented outside of their city at major races. So, perfect example, a woman that runs with us, Lisa in Parkdale, she said for one of the first times she saw us was in Chicago, when Parkdale had a cheer station in Chicago, and then searched us out in Toronto to figure out why people were in Chicago. And I know you guys put on a little marathon out in London every year. And you are in charge of that cheer station, which has really set the bar. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you show up for your city at the London Marathon?
Yeah, so we've been doing Cheer Dem at London Marathon, I think, since 2010. And it came about because I ran the marathon. First time I ran London and got to mile 18, and the wheels spectacularly just came off. My body just tapped out. And it just dawned on me that, there's a point in the marathon where, regardless of what level you are, it becomes hard. And, you need this extra pick me up from your friends or from the people around you. And, we decided we're going to do it, we're going to do a cheer station next year, because we want to invite people down so they can witness this marathon in the flesh. Because I think when you watch a marathon on TV, generally it's kind of elites, wheelchair racers, female elites, club runners, and then it kind of goes to charity run. I don't think you really get a real sense of what a marathon really is and what it means to people unless you watch it from beginning to end and see all the different levels of people going through. And we have a large amount of artists and graphic designers within Run Dem. And so the idea was just like, can we bring the feeling of carnival to the roadside of the London Marathon and give energy to every single person, every single runner who runs past us. So with each year that's gone by, it's grown bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more extravagant. And it's kind of ended up at the point where, there's almost like a paper trail from the moment you cross the start line until you hit mile 21. And then you get to the finish line, because there's this increase of posters and Run Dem related material from the, as you get towards this cheer station. And then there's this explosion of noise and color and confetti cannons and vibes. And then, we keep putting up poster reminders to keep on going until you get to the end. Because the thing about cheer stations is they can mash up your marathon.
That was coming out of my mouth. I would love to work with Strava or somebody and see what people's time is going through a cheer station versus before and after. Because I know how much energy that is. And luckily, I've been lucky enough to see what you guys do in London and see the arts and craft days leading up to the marathon. It's a whole production just to get to marathon day. Never mind cheering for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've tried to create as many touch points around the actual marathon event as possible. So we do have, this on the Friday night before the marathon, there's like there's a run that goes out where we do like a visualization exercise in the final mile, 2 miles of the marathon. Then on the Saturday morning, there's kind of the arts and craft where we make all the posters. You can bring your family, children come down, the whole crew comes down, we make all this stuff together, it's all handmade. Then on the Saturday night, we go out, at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and put the posters up on the course. Then we wake up in the morning early at 6 to get to the cheer point to put it together. And then we wait to the very end to take it all down. And then we go back a week later to make sure that the site is back to how it was, because we're opposite a church as well. And generally what happens is once our posters go up, then, anyone with a marker pen and a spray can comes out, the day after and uses that as an excuse to decorate the street. So we have to go in and repaint all of the hoardings and yeah, it's kind of it's been a really amazing thing, and it's grown into something, and it's something that a lot of people have replicated around the world and added their own spins and flavors to. And it's kind of a real shame that we didn't get to do it this year, because this year is the 40th anniversary of the London Marathon. So we had big plans, which are now all on hold. And of course they've moved the date, so now next year it's going to be in October. October's windy, this impacts the design, it's kind of got to take all this stuff into consideration.
Well, I get it, and I understand the disappointment. This would have been our 5-year anniversary since Bridge the Gap, as well as our 10-year anniversary of being a crew. So we too had some pretty lofty goals for what we wanted to do at the marathon this year. And it's, I guess everything happens for a reason, and we'll get back to it. And we'll keep it moving. So that brings up two things for me. One is just recapping of the importance of crew culture at marathons, because I think for a long time things were pretty status quo. And then the way I've personally seen it, and maybe I'm looking at this from an insider's view, so it's skewed, but I think crew culture gave something that was very traditional, it flipped it on its head a little bit and added some newfound energy to it.
Yeah.
And what I would also say that I've noticed is, and I'm sure you get this in your inbox nonstop after the marathon, is how do we join? How do we become a part of this? And what I love is the following year, there's people who might not run, but who want or can't run or are injured, and they know they still have a place at the marathon to now cheer, to give back to that energy that was given to them to get them through that section and ultimately to the finish line. Yeah,
indeed. I think cheer stations are important because it gives a focal point where people can come down and congregate, where it's not just about coming down and cheering your friend or cheering for your charity, but actually cheering for every runner that you see, and they've definitely kind of livened up a lot of, marathons that maybe, and I think also attracted a lot of people to marathon running who definitely wouldn't have considered that was something they could do. Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing, that what happens when you experience a cheer section from a crew at a marathon, it makes you realize that the marathon is not impossible, and it's something that you can actually do. And more importantly, when you do it, there will be people there lined and up and waiting to cheer you on to success.
Do you feel that is because within crew culture, people see themselves represented? It's not necessarily, you're not looking at the Moes and like this elite field that quite often we are not. And I think it's like it's you and your friends that's in the cheer station that you can see.
Yeah, I think there's partly that, and also it's partly this thing that you've all gone on this journey together. You don't go on a journey with elite athletes; they just turn up and perform. But when it's actually you're waiting for someone to come through the cheer section who you remember when they started running. You took their first steps with them. You know, you've been there for their first 5K, 10K, half marathon. It's like, you know, you've grown as athletes together. I think there's a real different feeling, you know, about cheering people because you know how much it means to them. I don't really know sometimes when I see kind of like the elite athletes flying through what it really means to them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously winning is important for them and then the prize money and so on and so forth. But what else, you know, what else is it about what they, you know, what they do?
It's funny. It's funny when you say that. I have never watched the Olympics, major marathon, anything where I've seen the elite field go by and become emotional off of it.
Yeah.
But you put me at cheer squad and you get me at that like 5 hour mark. And, you know, I mean, you pick the person basically.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like you can feel that story within everybody, that struggle, that shared emotion. And I swear, I know for me, sunglasses are mandatory at cheer squad because like there's not there's multiple points in that day where your eyes are welling up.
I mean, definitely. I mean, I think it's, you know, the marathon is an incredible thing to undertake and it takes you on an incredible journey.
Yeah.
You know, and as you said, 5 hours and beyond. Well, I think there were kind of peaks, you know, there's the sub 4 wave.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one is the sub 5 wave. And then, you know, the real stories start unfolding and you see some real, you know, soldiers of the road really getting it done. And it's, you know, it's very inspiring.
Yeah. And I think the same thing can be said for like the 10K portion of the race or the half marathon when you're seeing little kids or moms and kids or dads push it, you know, like I feel it brings in a relatable human element at some point. And I think that's that point where it's like you understand what cheer squads are all about.
Yeah. And it's important for races to have a relatable moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, because otherwise it just becomes this thing which just seems like, you know, you and I both know when you first started running, you never thought you'd meet someone who would like, you know, run a marathon, let alone, you know, an ultra marathon, let alone 100-miler, let alone run from LA to Vegas. You know, it's kind of, we've seen some incredible things happen over the course of crew culture that at one point, even a 10K seemed impossible.
It certainly felt impossible.
Do you know what I mean? It really, really seemed like this thing that was, you're going to meet one person who could run a 10K and then, you know, now, oh, you ran across the country. Oh yeah, of course you did.
Cool. What's next? It's taken that shine. Well, I think that brings us to a good point of like, where are we at now? Knowing that COVID has taken such a hit on the community. I feel like there's a lot of things that are being focused on that may have been under the surface, but may not have bubbled up to where it's a focal point, such as things like mental health and even personal safety of perfect example. Today, we had to make the decision to shut down the Parkdale Roadrunners runs for the remainder of phase 2 until we reassess in Ontario. And that personal safety has always come in, but it was always along like, you know, don't run with headphones, like things like can't say don't wear black because we know that's like the uniform.
That's the color.
But you know what I mean? Like, you know, don't cross the road without making sure the people behind you are safe. All of those things. And now it's taken that to a very different extreme.
Yeah, most definitely. And I actually, if I'm really honest, don't think that people were really prepared. I really have a general feeling that at no point did anyone think that a day would come where you wouldn't be able to run with your crew. And for people who don't understand crew culture, it's like, you know, for a lot of crews, a small run for them is running with like 60 people, you know, 50 people, 60 people. So it's really impacted, you know, our movement. But I think it's come at a good time because I really feel like the whole thing needed a reset anyway. And I think we've been forced to have a reset and to embrace all this other stuff that we often neglect, which will actually prolong our running careers. And you know, I think that crews will have a really, what were you going to
I
say?
was going to say, don't skip over that though. Can you give some examples? Because I know what you're up to, but I'd love for others to hear what
Oh,
that
okay, cool.
means.
Well, I think that basically, you know, for you know, a long time in crew culture, there was this newness about achieving the new, and the new was the distance and the time, you know, and so it was very much about, okay, so we're going to run, we're going to do these miles and these training sessions, and it's kind of, we're going to qualify for Boston, we're going to do this all stuff, and the stretching stuff, and thinking about form and nutrition, and yeah, you know, if you start embracing that, then that makes you a runner, or a bit too hardcore, or a bit too serious, and so, you know, we don't really need to do any of that, and then people start getting injured, you know, then people start retraining as yoga teachers and masseurs and physios and so on and so forth, and you know, but I feel like there was a real shift between people who were like, actually, to be a good runner, you have to kind of do more than just run. And I don't feel like that message really infiltrated into the masses in the run crew culture. I thought there was still this kind of like, yeah, I don't need to worry about that. I just run a 3:15 marathon, came out of the pub at like, you know, 2 hours before the race. I'm cool, I'm good. But I think what COVID did is it kind of took away the running part, and then maybe people were reminding me, people, of two things. That one, actually, we're quite blessed to be in a situation where on a weekly basis we can gather together with like-minded people, you know, to share a common passion. Secondly, actually, you know, I think a lot of people take running for granted because it's easy to do, because it doesn't really require equipment, or you know, you can go from I cannot run at all to, oh yeah, I just ran a marathon, 16 weeks later it's done.
Mm.
So I think that actually what's happened now is people are really realizing, like, okay, well, this running thing that I really never really connected with my mental health is actually quite important for it. And actually, now that I've stopped running as much, I'm actually noticing the, you know, my body more. You know, I think it's easy to hide pain when you run a lot.
Yeah.
You know, we're supposed to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, you know, my hamstring feels like it's about to explode. Don't worry about that. You know, it's kind of, I can soldier through. So I just think that there's been this general shift in attitude towards running and what it means. And I'm really excited for when we all can get back together again. What, you know, what are the learnings that we're going to bring, you know, to the table once we all manage to regroup? Because I know that running's changed for a lot of people now.
Yeah. And what I would say, what I've noticed during this pandemic is, and I see, not throwing shade, but the amount of people I've seen running in like Chuck Taylors or whatever, that you can tell that are like used to the CrossFit gym or used to a
Yeah.
certain style of workout. And now I'll speak for Toronto, our gyms are closed. They can get out on the street and they can still get their cardio in and they can do that. So what I think is happening is people are also finding a newfound love for running.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what, I don't want to say what the responsibility of crew culture in there, because I don't know that that's crew culture's responsibility, but I'm going to take this in a different way. This question then is like, with what what I feel like you've defined as crew culture, of what's come from, is a very small piece of what people are now calling running crews.
Yeah.
And anybody can just put crew behind their name and it's getting lumped in with something else.
Yeah.
What is the responsibility of the the original the original 6 years, whatever that it seemed like, that BTG relationship, all of these things that really started this crew identity? Is there a responsibility within the people within that to help the new people come along, or is there a division?
That's a really good question, actually. I think there definitely is a responsibility to help the new people coming along. In my experience, what often happens though is like new people coming along have, you know, don't necessarily want the help, because generally what I feel is you have a crew, then you have certain people who are kind of discontent with the way that that crew is run, or feel that there are things that are not serving them. So then they leave and they take a group of people to go and start their own crew, and then that crew that they've started then maybe might inspire someone who's never had a crew before. And then what I find in my experience is people don't necessarily want the help because they're not thinking 13 years down the line. So I'm speaking from a place of when I started Run Dem, there was the only crew that had a brand relationship were bridge runners, but it wasn't a thing for people who weren't athletes to have relationships with the running department or a sports brand at all. Those original crews that came out, they helped pioneer those type of relationships. It wasn't a thing for people to be, heralded for the fact that they ran if they weren't athletes. That's something that's happened as a result. But, for people who've been in it a very long time, we've seen the highs, we've seen the lows, we've seen the good points, we've seen the bad points. So I think there's a responsibility to kind of, let people know things to look out for. But what I've realized is actually it's kind of, each crew is different. Each person who runs a crew does it for different reasons. And maybe there was this idealistic moment where we all thought it was kind of, everyone would be singing from the same hymn book. But now I think it's kind of, crew culture is mainstream running culture now. It's kind of, if you look at mainstream running culture, it's crew culture that it's based on. It's kind of, you can see so many elements of crew culture that have been picked apart and are now part of the mainstream that actually, I think our purpose is to actually inform where it's going to go, not to actually be, just replicating what's happening now. But at the same time, seeing how, like for me, my big missions at the moment is kind of what role does a crew play during a global pandemic? Because, it's not just running miles, it's kind of the community side of things is now really, really important. Crews are going to be really important when the world reopens again and people are seeking community again and wanting to learn how to be around people again, because many of us, we haven't been around large groups of people for the best part of this year. And so people are going to need to be taught, how do you be around people? How do you share space?
That's really, it's interesting. I mean, there's two things that came up for me there again is when you were talking about the new, almost like people splintering off from crews and starting things. I almost look at it as like my young family members, or even when we were coming up in music, like the old heads were telling you what was happening 10, 15 years ago. And you're like, nah, what, you're old, like whatever. But not thinking like, oh, you've seen it. You can help. Like I can take bits and pieces from you if I listen to you. But I always look at them as like they were the old heads. So I think there's something there. The other bit that I found interesting was over the past few weeks, the amount of new people that were coming out to our crew runs that we haven't met before, we hadn't engaged with. And I feel like that is a part of, and this is kind of where my struggle with shutting it down is like people are coming out because they have not been around others. This might be their point of the week where they feel safe being in a group, and that could be because of whatever, I'm not going to put out whatever it is that might be going on with them, but the fact that like I was very surprised to see new people. I thought we were keeping it open for our core members who are just used to something, and what I noticed is that that wasn't the case week over week. So I do think you're right. Like when we do come back, what does that look like, and how are we almost reintroducing people to people?
Yeah, most definitely. I think one of the things that people are realizing is run crew communities are actually real communities. You can see the communities that stick together, because there are lots of brands that have communities that as soon as the pandemic hit, that community just dispersed immediately. And there was no connection between the brand and the so-called community. It was it was almost like everyone for themselves. So I think that, you know, when people are looking around at the moment for communities or sustainable communities or communities that are going to get them through this thing that's happening, that's taking a lot longer than people imagined would be happening for, they're looking at run crew culture. So it's no surprise that new people are coming, because they're now hearing about these, almost like this thing that was happening right underneath your nose that you didn't know about.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I always say to, particularly like a lot of the, you know, younger crews, is kind of, yes, you may be well known, but you're not, you know, you're not Drake known. You're not Beyonce known. There are still places in the world where they're like, what, run crew? What, you run together? Why would you want to do that? You know? And for me, I always think, you know, global, not local. My thing has always been, you know, and that's one of our reasons for starting a radio station, is kind of actually, you know, by harnessing the power of the internet and the medium of radio, well, you could actually get into everyone's house in the world and then start telling them about these philosophies of run crew and run and so on and so on and so forth. So, you know, if you look at a film like The Warriors, which was a really big influence on Mike for the beginning of, you know, his, you know, the Bridge Runners, I'm looking at it as like, you know, imagine if we did actually have our own radio station that you could tune into as you're going for your run. You know, that would be kind of interesting. Or actually, you know, being able to run in London whilst listening to someone who's made a show about running in China or something like that. You know, it's kind of, for me, it's always about, you know, I'm not panicking right now. I think there are a lot of people who are like freaking out, like, oh my God, I can't run with my crew. Oh my, you know, I'm just like, it's cool. It's fine. You know, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be okay. And we're going to regroup, and there's going to be some familiar faces, and there are going to be some absolutely brand new faces, and there are going to be some people we're never going to see again. But it's like the movement continues.
I can't think of a better place to end that, and I don't want to ruin it by adding my 2 cents or my observations. So
Yeah.
I'm going to put a pin in this, and
Okay.
I want. Can you let the people know where to find you, where to find Run
Yeah.
Dem?
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
If you are interested in any of the stuff that you've heard today, then you can check me out on Instagram at DaddyDarkRDC, DEDDYDARKRDC, for my people who are finding it hard to understand my hybrid accent. You can also catch us at rundemcrew.com or run.dem.crew. Basically, Instagram is where you can find us. You know, and stay tuned for Run Dem Radio. Soon come.
Soon time come. All right. Awesome. If you're in Toronto and want to run with the crew when we get back, find us at Parkdale Roadrunners. I'm boring as sin on the Instagram, so it's best just to follow my work through Parkdale Roadrunners. And CRS, thank you for the opportunity of letting me talk to Charlie on this. This is very much one of our typical conversations, but one of the first times we've also recorded one of our conversations. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing everybody out there soon enough in person. Until then, everybody, please stay safe. Do what you need to do to get on the other side of this. And yeah, I can't wait to share the road with everybody. Charlie, any last words from you, my friend?
As I always say to everyone at the moment, stand strong, stay awesome, stay safe. And remember, this is not the hardest thing that you've been through in your life. If anything, your whole life might have been a preparation for the current times that we find ourselves in. So you have to thrive. Stay positive. Onward and forward we roll.
Mr. Charlie Dark, thank you so much for your time.
No problem at all, my friend. Okay. Take care.
Wow.